Welcome back to Ethos Trek. I'm Sarah. For 2 episodes, we've built a foundation. We've examined the psychology of collective narcissism, the research that shows how emotional investment in inflated group greatness predicts hostility, conspiracy belief, and attraction to authoritarian leaders. We've looked at how the Nazis systematically weaponized this psychology to radicalize an entire generation. Today, we bring it home. No spin, just the research, the documentation, and the patterns visible in American political life right now. I want to be clear about something. This isn't about calling anyone Nazis. The point has never been to say, this is exactly like Nazi Germany. The point is to recognize that the psychological mechanisms of collective narcissism, documented, measurable, predictive, are operating in our political landscape today. Let's look at what the research shows. The research on collective narcissism and American politics. In 2018, researchers Christopher Federico and Agnieszka Golec de Zavala published a study in Public Opinion Quarterly examining collective narcissism and the 2016 presidential vote. Their finding was stark. National collective narcissism significantly predicted support for Donald Trump, even after controlling for party identification, ideology, and other demographic factors. Let me be precise about what that means. It's not just that conservatives supported Trump. It's that among all the psychological variables researchers measured, collective narcissism, the specific belief that America is exceptional but not sufficiently recognized, that the nation deserves special treatment, that criticism of America is an attack, uniquely predicted Trump support. A follow-up study in 2022 by Oliver Keenan and Golec de Zavala, published in Analyses of Social Issues and Public Policy, went further. They examined collective narcissism's relationship to support for anti-democratic measures. Their findings? Individuals high in national collective narcissism were significantly more likely to say Trump should, quote, stay in office, unquote, despite losing the election, even if it meant, quote, bending democracy, unquote. Bending democracy. For collective narcissists, democratic processes become subordinate to the leader who represents the group's greatness. The 4 pillars in American context. Let's examine how each component of collective narcissism manifests in current American political dynamics. Pillar 1. Hypersensitivity to perceived threats. The research documents that collective narcissism predicts threat perception that goes beyond realistic assessment of danger. Consider the documented rhetoric. Immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country, unquote. Political opponents are, quote, enemies within, unquote. Cities governed by Democrats are, quote, crime-ridden hellholes, unquote. Universities are, quote, hotbeds of indoctrination, unquote. The media is, quote, the enemy of the people, unquote. This isn't garden variety political disagreement. This is a worldview where threats are everywhere, existential, and require extreme responses. It's the zero-sum black and white perception that collective narcissism research predicts. A 2024 Pew Research survey found that more than 70% of Trump voters believe that future elections cannot be trusted if their candidate doesn't win. This isn't concern about specific electoral procedures. It's a pre-commitment to viewing any negative outcome as an attack on the group. Pillar 2. Intergroup aggression framed as defense. The research shows collective narcissism predicts what's called, quote, retaliatory aggression, unquote. hostility framed as self-defense. A 2025 study published in BMC Public Health examined MAGA Republicans specifically and found they demonstrated, quote, strikingly high prevalences of characteristics that have been associated with violence, including political violence, unquote. They were substantially more likely to endorse statements of authoritarianism, including calls to, quote, suspend Congress for a few years, unquote. The January 6, 2021 assault on the Capitol is the most visible example of this pattern. Participants understood themselves as patriots defending America from a stolen election, aggressors who saw themselves as victims fighting back. This framing is key. The violence isn't presented as offensive. It's presented as defensive. Quote, we're not attacking democracy. We're saving it from those who stole the election, unquote. Pillar 3, collective entitlement. The research documents that collective narcissism involves a sense that the group deserves special treatment simply for being who it is. Quote, make America great again, unquote, is, at its core, a claim of lost entitlement. The belief that America, and by extension, quote, real Americans, unquote, once held their rightful status and have been robbed of it. Historian John Fay, in his book Believe Me, describes the narcissistic nature of this nostalgia. Quote, the practice of nostalgia is inherently selfish because it focuses entirely on our own experience of the past and not on the experience of others. People nostalgic for the world of Leave It to Beaver may fail to recognize that other people were not experiencing the world in a way that they would describe as great, unquote. This is selective memory serving collective entitlement. A past where, quote unquote, we were great before, quote unquote, they took it away. Pillar 4, the mirror-focused charismatic leader. The research predicts that collective narcissists are drawn to charismatic leaders who embody the group's self-image and who are experienced as inseparable from the group itself. A January 2025 CNN SSRS poll found that 53% of Republicans viewed loyalty to Trump as central to their political identity. More important than, quote, a less powerful federal government, unquote. That was 46%. Or, quote, supporting congressional Republicans, unquote. That was 42%. Or, quote, opposing Democratic policies, unquote. That was only 32%. Think about what that means. Loyalty to a person ranks above policy positions, above party, above ideology. The leader has become the identity. The 2020 Republican Party platform made this explicit. Rather than articulating policy positions, it simply endorsed, quote, the president's America First agenda, unquote. The platform became the leader. The leader became the platform. Researchers studying identity fusion, where personal identity merges with the group or leader identity, found in a 2024 study that, quote, individuals who had fused their identity with Trump were not only more likely to believe the 2020 election lie, but internalized it as an attack on themselves if questioned, unquote. When you question the leader, you attack every person fused with that leader. This is exactly what collective narcissism research predicts. The need for chaos. Remember that collective narcissism correlates with what researchers call, quote, the need for chaos, unquote. A desire to tear down institutions that fail to give the group what it deserves. Consider the explicit rhetoric. Quote, "I am your retribution," unquote. The promise to, quote, "be a dictator on day one," unquote. The systematic targeting of institutional checks, courts, media, civil service, elections themselves. The researchers emphasize that people high in need for chaos, quote, "are not idealists seeking to tear down the established order so that they can build a better society for everyone," unquote. Instead, they want to, quote, "unleash chaos and mobilize individuals against the established order that fails to accord them the respect that they feel they personally deserve," unquote. This isn't conservatism in any traditional sense. Traditional conservatism values institutions, stability, ordered liberty. What collective narcissism produces is something very different. A willingness to burn down institutions that don't serve the narcissistic need. Conspiracy theories. The research documents a robust link between collective narcissism and conspiracy belief. The BMC public health study found that MAGA Republicans demonstrated high rates of belief in QAnon conspiracy theories and were substantially more likely to hold conspiracy-driven worldviews. This makes psychological sense. If your group is exceptional and the world doesn't recognize it, there must be an explanation. Someone must be preventing the truth from coming out. The, quote, "deep state," unquote. The, quote, "fake news media," unquote. The globalist elites. Conspiracy thinking isn't a bug of collective narcissism. It's a feature. It explains why the world doesn't give the group what it deserves. Critical thinking questions. Question 1. Is this just happening on one side? This is an important question. Collective narcissism is a human tendency, not a partisan one. It can manifest in any group. The research, however, documents an asymmetry in current American politics. A 2024 study in communication psychology found that, quote, "liberal conservative asymmetries in anti-democratic tendencies are partly explained by psychological differences," unquote. Specifically, differences in authoritarianism and social dominance orientation. That doesn't mean liberals are immune to collective narcissism, but the current configuration of American politics has concentrated collective narcissistic mobilization, primarily, though not exclusively, in one political movement. Question 2. Aren't there legitimate grievances driving this? Yes. Economic anxiety, cultural dislocation, declining life expectancy in some communities, loss of manufacturing jobs, opioid crisis. These are all real. But remember what the Nazi indoctrination research showed? Indoctrination is most effective where it can tap into pre-existing grievances and prejudices. Real grievances don't require collective narcissism to address them. But collective narcissism can exploit real grievances, redirect them toward scapegoats, and make them unsolvable by framing them as permanent persecution rather than concrete problems. The question isn't whether the underlying concerns are real. The question is whether the psychological posture being encouraged, grievance without solution, enemies everywhere, fusion with a leader, actually addresses those concerns or perpetuates them. Question 3. How do we distinguish patriotism from collective narcissism in our own moment? Well, we can apply the same test the researchers use. Does the group identity require constant external validation, or is it secure enough to accept criticism? Can the group acknowledge its flaws or is any criticism experienced as an attack? Does the rhetoric demand equality, the same rights and recognition as others, or supremacy, more than others deserve? Is there any achievable goal that would satisfy the grievance, or is the grievance permanent? Can the group's values be separated from a specific leader, or has the leader become the identity? So what do we do with this analysis? Well, individual actions. 1, you can use the framework to guide your conversations. When you're talking with someone showing collective narcissistic patterns, you now have a map. You understand that direct confrontation often strengthens these beliefs because criticism triggers the defensive aggression that's built into the psychology. Instead, ask questions that gently probe the assumptions, like, what would it look like for America to get the recognition it deserves? Or, how would we know when we'd achieved it? Questions that reveal the insatiable nature of the grievance. 2, distinguish the deeply fused from the peripherally attached. Not everyone in a movement is equally radicalized. The research suggests that people who have fully fused their identity with the leader may be difficult to reach, because questioning the leader is experienced as an attack on the self. Focus your energy on those who haven't made that fusion complete, people who have legitimate concerns but haven't yet adopted the defensive, aggressive posture. Those conversations can still make a difference. 3, protect institutional buffers. The research shows that collective narcissism correlates with willingness to, quote, bend democracy, unquote, and support for dismantling institutional checks. Support institutions that serve as buffers. Independent judiciary, free press, professional civil service, election administration. These aren't obstacles to democracy. They're democracy's immune system. Community actions. 4, build coalitions around concrete problems. Collective narcissism exploits real grievances, but makes them unsolvable. Counter this by organizing around concrete, achievable goals. Economic anxiety about healthcare costs? Organize around specific policy solutions. Concern about crime? Work on evidence-based public safety measures. When people see concrete progress on real concerns, the abstract grievance loses some of its power. 5, support counter-narratives. Collective narcissistic movements offer meaning, belonging, and purpose, however destructive the package. We need to offer alternatives that provide the same psychological goods without the poison. Communities that offer belonging without requiring an enemy. Identities that offer meaning without requiring grievance. Purposes that build rather than destroy. The patterns are visible. The research is clear. Collective narcissism, hypersensitivity to threat, aggression framed as defense, collective entitlement, fusion with a charismatic leader, is operating in American political life today. Understanding this isn't about demonizing anyone. It's about having a map. When you understand the psychology, you can respond strategically rather than reactively. You can recognize what you're dealing with and choose your battles wisely. In our final episode of this series, we'll focus on solutions. What does the research tell us actually works to counter collective narcissism? What are the strategies, individual and systemic, that can help us navigate this moment? Until then, I'm Sarah. This is Ethos Trek. Stay informed, stay thoughtful, and stay ready to act.